Okay, I got a pet peeve. Time to get up on my soapbox. Listen very carefully. Stop saying the forecast is always wrong. You're only hurting yourself and hurting this field. Besides that, you're wrong. I can be 100% correct. And I'll tell you why. Let's get to it. Welcome. The next episode of IBF On Demand, sponsored by Arkiva, your one-source S&OP software solution. Check them out as well, and thank them very much for sponsoring this. So we're rolling through these podcasts. This is episode number 10, I think now. Yes, this is episode number 10. We've done 10 of these now. And so blew past 1,000 subscribers. We got Arkiva on board as an excellent sponsor. I'm getting some questions in, and one of the biggest questions I get in, first and foremost, no, this is not a green screen behind me. This is an actual set I'm in. This looks like a small little studio. It's much larger on the inside. It's a great studio set up by Scott. We perform. And the other one is, no, I'm not wearing any pants, but that's a whole different discussion now. So this is a great podcast. I'm enjoying doing these. I'm enjoying getting this feedback from you as well. I said this is a community, but I want to take this one step further. I always ask you every make sure likes, share, subscribe. Continue to do those things as well. But I want to take it one step further. IBF is a much larger community than just these podcasts. This is just one piece we do. They got journals, they got blogs, we do conferences, they do town halls. There's a ton of stuff we do for the 50,000 members worldwide. So I want to ask you, if you're not one of those members, please consider becoming a member. Yeah, you're going to get discounts at events and different things we do. You're going to have access to all the past journals, a lot of other videos we have from conferences as well. So it definitely is worth the investment. But beyond that, you're investing in yourself, but you're investing in this community. So I ask you, if you subscribe to this, you need to look at not only subscribing, but becoming a member of the IBF as well, and becoming a member of the much larger community to foster the growth of demand planning, predictive analytics, business forecasting, S&OP, and related fields. That's what we're about, is fostering the growth. We're looking at elevating the careers that you're in so everybody benefits as well. So really, that's what we're all about, and hopefully you do consider becoming that member. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I said, a pet peeve of mine. Something I continue to hear that just drives me crazy. The forecast always wrong. There's actually whole processes built around that concept, that forecast, failed processes that are built around the concept that forecasts are always wrong. In essence, every business decision is built on a forward-looking projection, which in essence is a forecast. So you're saying forecast is wrong. Guess what? Every business decision is going to be wrong as well. And we know that's not inherently not true. And there's a problem with that statement as well. Your forecasting being wrong cannot be an automated response that you have. You're not only doing problems, but you're lowering the effectiveness and confidence in the forecast when you say that. As you continue to say the forecast is always wrong, guess what? People are going to start having less confidence in what you're providing. It justifies poor actions. It justifies poor actions in you. It allows you to have poor actions by saying that as a crutch, but it also justifies poor actions in others. I said there's looking at ways that people justify what they do because forecasts are bad. So you're justifying poor actions by continuing to say this and utilizing that as a crutch. And guess what? I said it hurts you as well. If you keep going around telling someone that, guess what? You're wrong. you're going to start believing it as well. I said, we understand this field, it takes some thick skin to be in this field. I get that. Why make it worse? Why keep putting yourself down and allowing other people to put you down as well? You're going to create a guilt at that point. It's going to be, it has to impact your performance in time the more you keep hearing that. And rather be agreeable than honest. Your job is not about a number, but it's about insights. It's not about that number you provide, but rather it's about the insights you provide. And if you're providing good insights that people make good business decisions on, then guess what? It's not that your number was wrong, your insights were good. And you don't need to be, I said, I'd rather not be agreeable, but be honest with people. And the last thing is you're focusing on the wrong things. And I kind of alluded to that with a few of these statements already, that you're really focusing on the wrong things. That you're allowing for poor actions, but you're really not telling the entire story then as well. Uncertainty is not performance. Uncertainty you have in what you're forecasting and the numbers and ranges that you're providing is not the same as performance. There's a little bit of nuances and difference in that. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But it's an important nuance because uncertainty is important. Uncertainty, guess what? Allows people to make better decisions. And that's where it goes back to, being honest instead of agreeable. If you understand the uncertainty you have in your forecast and supply chain, you can plan for those a little bit better. So it's not that you're planning for the forecast always being wrong. You're planning for the inherent uncertainty that is in a process, that is in consumer behavior, that's in the models, that's in multiple different things you have. And guess what? That uncertainty plays in the supply chain as well with lead times and supplier performance. And there's uncertainty all the way through your supply chain and in business. Things have uncertainty as an inherent risk to them. Hiding that uncertainty of you're wrong disguises what you need to be focused on, is protecting yourself for some of that risk. And the other thing is the probability, not precision. And that's a key piece as well. To really focus on that probabilities. The last podcast, we talked a little bit about data science and demand planners and that difference. If you missed that, check out that last one. It's episode 9. I had a great interview with Nicholas. And one of the things he brought out in that was that it's a different mindset. And when we talked about ambiguity, uncertainty, and we talked about, sometimes that data science have a problem with ambiguity or the uncertainty, he corrected me, rightfully so, and said, no, they look at it differently. When they look at, we give so many, it's going to be in the supervised learning, we have, these are dogs. So I have a 98% probability it's going to get, when I give it a picture, it's going to have dog as the right answer. Forecasting, it's going to be a lower probability. Your forecast accuracy may be a lot less, but it's a probability is what you're looking at. So you really need to focus and understand those probabilities. That's a mindset of a data science that demand planners need to start looking at as well. If you look at, I'm wrong and my forecasted number was wrong, you're not focused on the probability and the uncertainty aspect of it. And you're lost in the right and wrong type of scenario and discussions that's happening. And you're having the wrong discussions at that point as well. We need to start looking at how we talk about this and start changing the way we're talking about this, because we're doing nothing but harm to ourselves, to the company, and to the planning process right now by continuing this, let's call it a myth, that demand planners and forecasting is always wrong. Now I get that, when we look at the principles, one of the first things we have is we're not 100% accurate type thing. And I'd say that having a forecasted number, yes, you're most likely never going to be 100% accurate. But the problem is I said we're changing our mindsets to be more probabilistic in thinking. The uncertainty is natural. The what we don't know is going to be part of that uncertainty. And it's inherent in our forecasting process, inherent in our models, inherent in the inputs, inherent in consumer behavior. And those type of things are more probabilities of the uncertainty than they are a forecast accuracy aspect of it. A common example I hear a lot of times utilized for this is dice. If we look at this, if we try to roll 2 dice, kind of the probabilities of exact outcome is going to be equal of any of the dice every time. Every time I roll, it has the same probability of coming up a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same probability. I'm not talking about, the 20-sided dice or anything of that sort. I'm talking about a regular 6-sided dice. Now, the total, adding up those 2 numbers, though, that's not equal. The probability of getting a 1 and a 1 to add up to 2, or probability of getting a 6 and 6 to add up to 12 is going to be different than the probability of getting a 6, 7, or 8. There's different probabilities of adding those numbers and coming up with the right answer. So if I looked at a normal distribution of if I'm going to get a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, what I'm going to be able to forecast rolling 2 dice every time, what's my next dice roll going to be? If I forecast, let's say a 7, that's right in the middle. And I say it's plus or minus 2. So it's going to be either a 5, a 6, 7, 8, or 9. I have over a 60% probability that's going to occur. So my range now is a 7 with a plus or minus 2 is my forecasted range. 60% probability it's going to fall in that. If I forecast a 7, it's going to be a 16.7% probability that I'm going to actually forecast a 7. So if you're forecasting that point, because my mean is going to be 7, I'm going to be right exactly 16.7% of the time. Majority of the time, guess what? My forecast is wrong. But if I'm forecasting anywhere from 5 to 9, now 60% of the time or more, I'm going to be right. This is the difference between forecasting a range and forecasting a point. And it's the difference between the forecast always being wrong and your forecast being right the majority of the time. At the same time, guess what? If I want 90% probability, I'm going to be between a 3 and 11. Now that really becomes not that useful in planning or making decisions at that point. So you really need to balance what's going to be useful in decision making to what the data and probabilities are actually telling you. And this is a different way of looking at it for a lot of times for a lot of people out there. It's a different mindset, and it's something that you really need to start looking at and communicating a little bit differently. So with that, I can say there's really a difference between what accuracy is and forecast error. Measure forecast error, you're measuring the uncertainty, in essence, what you're doing. So if you're measuring how precise you are predicting to a point, if how much that 7 is going to be, my forecast error to that 7 is in essence measuring uncertainty. And a lot of times, if you're measuring forecast accuracy, or you're measuring forecast error, say you're doing a mean absolute percentage error, or a mean percentage error, you're measuring the inherent uncertainty. I said, once again, the uncertainty of the inputs, uncertainty of your model, uncertainty of consumer behavior. There's certain uncertainties in there. You're measuring it. You're not necessarily measuring performance. Not to talk, a lot about old podcasts, but once again, I did an entire podcast on this as well. It was called Forecast, the Magic of Forecast Value Add. Or I interviewed Sarah from Coca-Cola and talked a lot about measuring the process opposed to measuring the uncertainty aspect of it. So please go back and check out that. There's a lot of great articles on that forecast value add as well. One of my favorite, yes, I'm nerdy enough to have a favorite KPI, but one of my favorite KPIs is forecast value add. And it talks a lot about measuring the process. And the reason I like that measurement so much is because you aren't necessarily measuring the uncertainty. You are measuring the process and how you do it opposed to a naive or some type of foundational benchmark type of forecast that you produce. So when you're measuring error, you're measuring the uncertainty. If you're measuring accuracy, though, you can be measuring your accuracy of your range is what you can do. So you can look at that range type forecast, that 5 to 8 that I say is going to happen 60% of the time, and you can measure to that instead. It's one of the key things you can do. So when you're saying that your forecast is always wrong, what in essence you're saying is your variability is perfectly normal. If I'm saying that I'm going to be getting an error, I'm saying forecast variability is perfectly normal. And here's my normality. Here's my range of normality that I have. Because because if you look at the best practices, IBF laid out some basic principles of forecasting. And in that, one of them, it does say that we're not 100% accurate. That's like the first one off that list. But if you keep going down that list, another one is you should provide a range forecast or provide the uncertainty of your forecast is something you should do on a regular basis, because forecast comes in ranges. And that's the difference between a precision of a predicted point and the accurate range of expected variability. That's the difference in what you're trying to present. And that's a best practice as well. And that's really what we need to try to get to, looking at that probabilities, looking at that range forecast. And the one thing I alluded to a little bit ago, is not too long ago as well in this, was talking about all that good information that in essence you're throwing away and don't understand if you don't present it right. Not only are you hiding bad behavior by saying, the forecast is wrong, but you're hiding the true information in that and not presenting that range, not presenting the uncertainty to the decision maker to understand what the risk and opportunities may be. You're throwing away good information with a single point forecast. I get it. There's a lot of systems that require a single point forecast to be able to do supply chain planning, to be able to do purchasing, be able to do, left cut capacity, things of that sort. But there's also capabilities in scenario planning with a lot of these systems. Archive is a great one. They got some great scenario planning capabilities that can be able to utilize different ranges of inputs and forecasts to be able to look at that capabilities. Or if you're presenting in an S&OP process, what exactly is that uncertainty? What is the range that we could be talking about as far as the forecast? Without that, you're throwing away valuable information. What information don't you have? With a range forecast, you not only know that center, you may know that point forecast you want to decide on that, but you also know the top, you know the bottom, and you know the magnitude of the variability. You're getting 4 critical pieces of information in a range forecast you don't get with a single point. With a single point, you don't know where that point fit in that range. It's just a consensus you ended up with. You don't know how far up it can go, how far down it can go, and you don't know the magnitude you have of this. And I've seen this play out a lot of times with different items. You have some items that are steady state, been around for a while, long history, a lot of channels are utilizing it, very low variability. But other items that may be, intermittent demand or not too many channels, new items, end of life type items that have a large variability, and you're planning the two the exact same because you're missing out on that valuable information of how much uncertainty and the magnitude of variability is involved with each of these items. Same can go for customers. You could have some customers, very low variability. Some customers are all over the board because they batch orders, because they have other things going on. You have to understand that variability. Right now, when I'm recording this, we're just coming out of a global pandemic when I'm recording this. And I don't care what it is, but it was a shock to the system. Anything that causes that much shock to the system shut down economies. You've seen a lot of variability. Going through this process, one of the biggest lessons learned is to really understand that variability and have honest conversations about that variability. That's one of the biggest lessons we learned through this. Take that lesson forward. Continue to understand that variability and communicate that variability honestly, truly, and have that conversation with people. Get away from the single point to, hey, here's what really is possible. And that's really what we have to look at being able to do going forward. And that's really the first thing. I want to break this down to three things. Provide the right range is the first step. Because with that said, you can be better probability of being correct, less precision, more correctness, more accurate. How do you provide that range? There's a lot of ways of doing this, okay? If you ever seen the cones of uncertainty? One way of doing this is looking at, kind of an ensemble type models when you take multiple different models and you look at the models, highs of some models, the lows of other models, the median of all the models together type situation. And you really develop this cone of uncertainty with these types of, do it a lot of times in weather. When you look at these hurricanes, the kind of spaghetti diagram of all these different paths, and it really develops this true cone of here's my average or where I'm looking at with these models. Here's the high side of the models. Here's the low side of these models. Here's the paths it could take. You could do the same thing with your models. If you're looking at multiple models inside of a system, which a lot of great software providers have is multiple models, you can look at these different models and look at the highs and lows and where the median is, and actually look at ways of combination type modeling, which works a lot of times better than a single model sometimes as well. You could actually look at the past. You could look at past performance of your process, past performance of your model, past performance of the inputs, past performance of consumer behavior, and then understand that uncertainty and variable that's you've observed in the past and apply that going forward. Generally, we're 40% type of MAPE going backwards. Okay, I'm going to apply that forward as a plus or minus going forward is what I'm looking to be able to perform going forward. So you really have a past performance can be indicative of future results a lot of times. And you really look at what you observed, item, customer, inputs, and then put that as your range going forward. Another thing I've seen companies use is either a COV or a DVI. DVI is demand variation index, or COV, coefficient of variation, where you look at your inherent variability you have in your data set. And the only difference between the two is COV, you're actually going to square the magnitude of that you are from your mean, where DVI just takes the delta of where you are from the mean of from the past behavior. So it doesn't square them is the only difference. So it's closer aligned to a mean absolute percentage error opposed to a COV, which is closer aligned to a mean squared error. So that's really the difference between the two. But that basically both of them are looking at the same thing. They look at your historic data and they look at how much variability from a mean that data set has. That can give you an answer of how much variability you may see going forward. And that you can then translate that into this is the inherent variability inside the data set. Now, I agree. A lot of questions coming up with that is, do you do any kind of, smoothing of outliers? Do you look at deseasonalize that data? Great questions. And I hope those are the questions that come to your mind. Because if those are the questions that come to mind, those are the right questions to start asking. And unfortunately, it depends on your data set. If you're asking the data question, then yes, there may be inherent seasonality. There may be outliers in your data set that you need to start looking at then. That's why you might be asking those questions. It may not exist, or you may want to just go with the raw data set because it's going to give you the worst case type scenario, because guess what? You may be recognizing outliers that aren't truly outliers. Those are truly events that could reoccur. So why are you going to put it as an outlier? You're actually dampening the risk going forward if you actually smooth that out. So you want to have those outliers in there. Those are all questions you need to ask your individual selves, your company, and your data before you start going forward with it. But one of the things you can look at is like a DVI, demand variation index, or a COV with your inherent data set, and then understand the uncertainty in that. The other is how much risk. It could be a judgment from the same way you put together forecast, have a judgment component sometimes from executives or operate. It could be what they're willing to accept as a risk or what they feel is the top and bottom of. It could be from a consensus. The same way you build a consensus forecast, you can build a consensus top and bottom to your range as well. And to be honest, there's nothing really wrong in that. I'm seeing a lot of that happen. I just mentioned the pandemic we just recently went through. I'm seeing a lot of companies do that because there was so much uncertainty through this. They didn't really know where the top and bottom was. And what they arbitrarily looked at is said, okay, there's a potential we could be 30% less than what we're seeing right now. It went off of what they're seeing in the industry, what they've seen in past recessions. There was some, analytics to it, but mostly it was just what they felt. But it was okay because the company was a consensus bottom of what they felt they could be, where it could go. So the same way you build a consensus forecast, you can build a consensus top and bottom to your range. The important is if it's a consensus, everybody's on board and you're working towards the same objective of what my top is, what my bottom is, what my center consensus is, and how much uncertainty I think there may be in the forecast right now. So looking at multiple forecasts, putting them together, find tops and bottom, looking at your past performance, looking at your inherent variability of your individual items, or just building a consensus inside your organization, inside your process you have right now. But ultimately, what you want to try to do is provide the right range for your company. That's number one, provide the right range. Second, you want to start looking at the right KPIs. There's ways you can actually measure that range forecast that you have. You can actually start measuring probabilities, total percentile error, TPE. Is one way. It actually measures the full spectrum of uncertainty you have in a range. It was actually, I believe, Nicholas Taleb in the Black Swan. He was actually talked a little bit about that TPE, total percentile error. There's some great practitioners that are doing a lot about probability forecasting, range forecasting as well. They talk about TPE in detail, exactly how to do that calculation, a lot about that formula as well. And it's a great formula if you want to actually look at something that measures that full spectrum of uncertainty and what you're forecasting as well. It can get a little more complicated. If you want something a little bit easier, I said, I'm nerdy enough to have a favorite KPI, FVA percentage. It focuses on the process. If you look at your DVI as your forecasted range, and then you can measure a MAPE against your DVI, guess what? You're pretty much measuring an apples to apples type of comparison then of if you outperformed what the inherent variability of your data set is. And you can look at that as your range, and looking at forecast value add is measuring how good you did in your process. It measures the process. It measures the inputs. There's a lot of great ways to use it. If you haven't already, I've talked about it a lot. So hopefully you've already, know a lot about it, or you're researching it on your own. But if not, you have to look into FVA percentage as something to looking at as a right KPI to be looking at it for your process as well. Another thing, E-score was something that an article that I developed. It was a scoring error score, was a scoring function opposed to an error. A scoring function is a little bit different than measuring error. It's a scoring function for probability forecasting, where I talked about you have that high, your low, your center. It looks at measuring a probability to adding a probability to that. I said 5 to 7, 5 to 9, 60% probability. If I can get those pieces, I now can measure my accuracy. And it does an E-score. That was actually in the Journal of Business Forecasting. It was actually in Demand-Planning. I'll put the link down below. Check out that article as well that talked a lot about the E-score. And it's an easy way, I thought, of being able to utilize a scoring function to look at a range forecast with probability and how good you did going forward. And that's one capability as well. So provide the right range, looking at the right KPIs. The final thing I would look at being able to do is please start changing your vocabulary. The goal is not to be precise, but to be reliable and have useful insights. So we're not providing a data point forecast. That is one output we have. But what we're providing is useful insights. And if we look at that is our job. And if that's what we're trying to manage going forward, guess what? We're going to do a lot better job at doing that. Stop saying the forecast is wrong. Stop saying I'm providing good insights. And here's what those insights mean. Uncertainty is a very difficult discussion to have. I get that. But we need to start having those discussions. One of the ways we can better transition and have a better discussion on uncertainty is through probabilities. People naturally, inherently, they understand probability. They don't understand probability, but they understand the concepts of probability enough that you can have those discussions with people and start having those discussions with executives. You need to start getting other people on board, change the language, change the vocabulary in your company. Stop saying forecasts are always wrong. I'm providing insights. Here's my forecast, and here is the opportunity and risk inherent with the uncertainty of this forecast. Here's the probabilities I'm providing with these insights so you can make a better decision. Change your vocabulary, because guess what? It's going to change a lot of people's they're going to start utilizing your forecasting more, have more confidence in what you provide. You're going to start having more confidence. And guess what? With all that comes a better process in the end. So I said this was a soapbox podcast, something that's a pet peeve of mine that I wanted to relate to you and hopefully give you some insights through the process and some ideas. I want you to listen to all these podcasts and listen to those nuggets I have, hopefully. That's my goal, is to have those nuggets. If you could take one thing out of this and saying, hey, I have thought of a new way I can do a range forecast, or hey, I never thought of the impact of keeping saying forecast or as long as having on my process and people accepting what I'm providing them. If you can just take nuggets away and new ways of looking at things, that's the goal. I want to make you think. I'm not giving you all the answers. I don't have all the answers. But if I can make you think and you can discover the answers, I've succeeded. And with that, I succeeded with another podcast. And I'm going to keep these coming. This is number 10. We're going to keep these coming. I got number 11 right behind this, number 12 after that. And I can't do it without you. I can't do it without Arkiva, your one-stop S&OP software solution. And I hope that you help us out. Check them out. Check us out at ibf.org. Like, share, make sure you subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 now. So we've got to keep this community growing. Let me know what I can do for you, Eric at ibf.org. And with that, thank you very much. And don't forget, wash your hands.